Good evening, Montreal. Welcome to another edition of the Suburban Radio Hour. I'm Beryl Wiseman, editor of the Suburban, with my colleagues Anthony Bodempart, features editor, Mark Lidbetter, sports editor, Mike Cohen with all the news, entertainment, society news, and a special in-studio guest today, our own Jennifer Cox. We'll be getting to her in a few moments. Been a busy week as always. Thankfully, a suspect has been arrested in the Shivakadola shootings. The motion to expedite Cavendish defeated by Projet Montréal. Bill 65, which should halt evictions and renovictions for 3 years, is under review right now. Hopefully will be passed by the end of next week or the week thereafter. Quebec's going to remove the floor price on gas. We'll be talking with Joel Chiashu about that a little bit later on. Lots of other stuff for you, news you need to know. Pick up your Suburban, and we're going to give you a taste of next week's as well. We have a very special guest with us to lead this off, and the story that this week captured so much imagination is that a day after Mayor Plante had, as I wrote in often, the audacity to talk about Montreal as a city of peace, we had the 8th violent attack against a Jewish institution. No North American city even comes close to that. And yet, our mayor refuses to give police the leniency to do what they have to do to enforce the law, continues to talk about anti-Semitism not being acceptable, usually equivocating with Islamophobia, yet refuses to condemn the radical Islamists that are running rampant in our city, that are assaulting, that are destroying property, that have attacked Jewish institutions with everything from guns to firebombs. This is the legacy that this mayor will leave. This week we had another Jewish school in Outremont with gunshots in it. And my special guest is Yair Slack, the CEO of Federation CJA, and which made a very eloquent call, and to the best of my memory, the first time they've actually specifically called for municipal officials to do something, called on Mayor Plante to, quote, demonstrate leadership and put an end to the rampant anti-Semitism in our streets. What politicians say matters. That's the signals that there is not license to run rampant in our streets. Yair Slack, thank you for being with us.
Meryl, thank you for having me.
It was a very dramatic statement that Federation and CJA put out. What would you like to see the city do?
Beryl, it's been a very interesting week. The same evening that we found out about the horrific, and again, let's call it what it is, intimidating, fear-mongering, and really cowardice that is taking place on the streets of Montreal. That same evening, I was actually speaking to a group of young adults in Montreal, all bringing up young families, all Jewish, and all wanting to know what their future in Montreal holds. And as I was talking to them, you hear that the lived experience that they're having, not as Jews, but as citizens of a city that can't believe that the leading story in a week which is filled with so many other stories, right, is the fact that once more, we see an attack, a cowardly attack, at early hours of the morning on a Jewish institution to create fear and to create anxiety in the Jewish community so that we retreat from Jewish life. And by the way, this community will not retreat from Jewish life. And I'm saying that again, will not retreat from Jewish life. We're resilient. We will continue to live here. But we do know one thing, Beryl, and that is when decisive action is taken, when decisions are made to put an end to what's happening on the streets of a city, on university campuses, we know that it comes to an end.
And we saw that 2 weeks ago when the riot squad was called out to take out some of these protesters from the middle of President Kennedy Avenue.
And you saw it 2 weeks ago, and you see it in the United States, not everywhere in the United States, by the way, but where you see leaders take decisive action, whether on university campuses or municipalities or wherever that source of power is, to empower the police to make sure that they make the right decisions. Guess what we see? The end to violence, the end to anti-Semitism, the end to chanting in the streets of Montreal for an intifada, chanting for Sharia law in the city of Montreal. These are things that I don't believe that Montreal citizens are looking to have here. And that's why in our statement, which was pretty clear, we're looking for the leadership of this city to say we're better than this. We can do better. We must do better. While today it's about protecting the Jewish community, Beryl, I can promise you it doesn't end there. It's never ended there. History has shown us it never does.
It never ended there, and it's already not ending there in the very words of the protesters who have gone from anti-Israel to anti-Semitic to just straight out kill the infidel. All the infidels. They want their Sharia law imposed. They want our society to bend to them. But I want to get back to an important point that underlies your statement and your comments. And I've written about this, and I sincerely believe it. I've seen it. And I know you work very closely with security authorities and with the police, and they look to politicians, do they not, for signals in their language, in their words, to give them an idea of how far they can go. Now, I know from my police sources that they're being stopped. We have film of some of these incidents where it's questionable why action wasn't taken. Do you feel that the police are waiting for a signal from Mayor Plante?
I believe very strongly, Beryl, that, as you said, words matter. And politicians have a way of making clear their intentions through their statements and through what they're looking to achieve. If we do want peace in our city, as Mayor Plante tweeted, I believe, last week, then let's be clear. We can get there. But in order to get there, we need to restore law and order. And that's the message that has to be given. Let's restore the law and order. There are, and Beryl, you and I would agree, the freedom of speech, freedom to protest is a critical part of our democracy.
It's critical.
And it has boundaries when it comes to hate speech.
The only
boundaries. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. The only boundary is overt incitement to violence, which we have seen continuously for 6 months, since the day after the October 7th slaughter. People forget the first time these people went into the streets was October 8th. There was no war in Gaza. There was no Israeli retaliation. October 8th.
Calling for a global intifada and death to Jews. So again, if we want peace on the streets, then the language has got to be clear that we need to restore order.
And not even new laws, just to enforce the laws we have.
We have the laws to bring order. So the language is critical. Let's bring peace through enforcing the law, and let's make sure that when we do so, we understand that calling for the death of Jews, calling for intifada, making calls for a life that none of us are looking to lead in this amazing city called Montreal, those are the boundaries around free speech. Hate speech, speech that is calling for the death of others, is one of the red lines. And when crossed, it needs to be dealt with. And I think that's really the language. When you talk about language, it's so critical. That's the language that we're looking for.
Slack, thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. I would leave everybody with one note. These mobs in the streets, these thugs, these haters have gone down from the thousands to a couple of hundred. We can end it. But as you heard your ear say, and you've hopefully read me in the paper, they require a political authority, or as Federation put it, the municipal authorities, to send a clear signal. Thank you, Slack.
Thank you, Beryl.
Two initiatives in Quebec made the news last week and could be a really important help to everybody. Housing Minister Duranceau introduced Bill 65, which will halt evictions. It's an effort to stop the renoviction epidemic. It'll just put a halt to evictions, to rent-evictions for 3 years. Also, the bill lowers the eligibility of low-income seniors from 70 to 65. You've been in your residence for 10 years. You're 65, low-income, very hard to get you out. Very important initiative. And Energy and Economy Minister Pierre Fitzgibbon announced that the floor price on gasoline will be removed, which will bring needed relief at the pump. Joel Chashu covered both those stories. Joel, thanks for being with us. How are you?
I'm good, and you?
Okay. First of all, I think a lot of people would be wondering, why was there a floor price on gasoline to begin with?
It's a good question. And it was to protect small independent gas retailers from predatory chains who are trying to, price them out of the market and consolidate. And that provision was put into Quebec's Energy Act. It's actually the proper name is the Petroleum Products
Act.
Petroleum Products Act. That was put in about 26 years ago. And the reason was to protect those independent retailers. But what they saw, what Fitzgibbon said a little more than a week ago, was it ended up happening anyway. Consolidation happened. The big chains took over. So really, there was no point in keeping that provision in the law.
And in fact, that provision actually hurt consumers.
Well, yeah. So here's how the floor price is determined. Because if a retailer would sell gas at a price lower than the sum of the minimum price that they pick it up for at the refinery, the transport costs, federal and provincial taxes, and operating costs by the retailer, that was deemed abusive. So now they're removing that requirement, but also in the law is an obligation for retailers to be posting fluctuations in gas prices from day to day throughout Quebec. Now they're going to have to report their prices to the the Régie d'Énergie. And there's going to be an online platform set up precisely for this purpose. So it's going to restore some transparency and balance to the market. That's what Fitzgibbon and the CAC want. And in spite of some of the rumors you may have heard, because Fitzgibbon was caught, in an impromptu scrum when he mused about the attraction of hiking gas taxes. He said it was a good idea, but there's no intention, he said, to do that. His boss, François Legault, the premier, nixed that idea months ago when asked about it. So that's not going to happen. But the floor price is gone. But did you also know
it's not gone yet. They're going to be changing the regulations later on, but it's happening. Unlike Bill 65, which is really important to so many people and so many stories that you yourself have covered of rent evictions and vulnerable people that's now in committee, and they're hoping to pass it by Friday, June 7th, which I believe is the last date of the session.
Yeah, so 65 will put the kibosh on rent evictions temporarily for 3 years. This is a moratorium.
Right.
This is not a permanent measure. What it does is it prevents landlords from evicting tenants if their intention is to subdivide, make the units larger, or change the location of a unit. In other words, rent evictions. It doesn't stop landlords from evicting tenants if they want to repossess the property, like for a family member. Mm-hmm. But this is expected to help thousands of households. And what's interesting is that there is a provision that the government can lift the measure from individual cities, cities of 10,000 or more, where vacancy rates rise to 3%, which is what they're targeting and is largely understood in the industry and by advocates of the balanced market.
They want to restore the inventory. They want to restore a balance.
Correct.
Because we're at an almost all-time low right now.
Correct.
Which is
listen, it's a great move, because anytime you have Quebec Solidaire and the CAC agreeing on a policy, it's worth paying attention to. And this really got kudos from Quebec Solidaire. Not only because of the eviction measure, but also because of the widening of protection of seniors.
And more importantly than Quebec Solidaire, it got the approval of a lot of the housing advocates around the city, from Project Genesis to FRAPRU to you name it.
Well, yes. So Project Genesis, I spoke with a lawyer from Project Genesis who welcomed the legislation, although they'd like to see it permanent. There's more on that in my story. So the housing minister, France-Hélène Duranceau, she was widely criticized for her last piece of legislation, Bill 31, a few months ago, which put an end to lease transfers, lease assignments.
Right.
Made it easier for landlords to just say niet, to say no, to not allow them. So this was kind of seen as a balance. And what she said was that immigration, specifically the large number of non-permanent residents in Quebec, have really pressured the market and left tenants without means with very few options. So this is why it's a 3-year plan. There's no indication yet whether the 3 years is already been considered as just a trial balloon, but advocates are happy to get those 3 years right now.
Absolutely.
So we're going to see what happens.
Joel Chatham, thanks very much. Until next week.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
West Island got some good news this week on two fronts: on health, a little bit, and on transportation. And we have our Chelsea St. Pierre with us. Chelsea, so Communato I'm not going to pronounce it. I'm not pronouncing it right, Anthony, am I? Communato.
You have 4 more tries, Beryl.
Communato, what the hell with it, is expanding into Dorval Lachine. But let's start first with something a little more important. The Lakeshore General finally got its modular ER working. Now, could you just tell us quickly and briefly why they needed a modular ER and what's being done with the permanent ER?
Yeah, so the permanent ER needs to be completely taken down and rebuilt. So the reason why they needed the modular ER is because they could never find a way to renovate it bit by bit, because the internal structure, some of the important pillars within the structure need to be completely taken down. So the modular ER ensures that the ER continues to operate at full capacity, even more. They added a few beds while they do the full renovation of the ER. And the same modular building will serve once the new ER is built and they move that out of the modular, then other parts of the hospital that need to be renovated over the next several years as part of a longer term plan, they'll be able to use that space in a similar fashion. And
the modular ER is now fully functional, as we understand from your story.
It is fully functional.
They had a smooth transition.
Absolutely. It took a few hours, in fact, because they also took the opportunity to buy all new equipment. So more than 90% of the equipment put into the modular was brand new. So there wasn't much difficulty moving the patients over. They moved them over one by one on the beds. They walked them over, and those that were near the time to be sent home or to other parts of the hospital, which was about 10% of the population at that moment, were just kept in the old ER until they needed to move to either to home or to the other place in the hospital.
Now, the other somewhat good news for the West Island, which doesn't get too much services, certainly not the amount of services they need in healthcare. Communato is making a huge expansion and will now be serving Dorval and Lachine in greater numbers.
Yeah, so it will have in Dorval, it will be one of their Communato stations. I forget what it's called exactly, but it's one of their pickup locations. So it's a Communato parking, and so people can go and take the cars there. There's another side of the service of Communato throughout different parts of Montreal where people can, let's say, pick up a car that's parked somewhere. So these cars have a GPS on them, and then people who are subscribed to it. So let's say you take your car to work at the Suburban, and then somebody, within the same building at another company needs to take a car to go somewhere else, and the car is shown as available from that time to that time. Then, so the cars move around in that fashion.
Well, we can only hope that this thing works as smoothly as you've made it sound, because this is Montreal after all. Chelsea St. Pierre, thanks very much for being with us, and thanks for the great work.
Thank you, Beryl.
We will be right back with my friend and colleague Anthony Bonaparte and a special guest in studio, as I said, our own Jennifer Cox. But first, let's check in with the CJD Traffic Center.